Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. We're going to have a drawing. One lucky winner gets to take this home. No, I'm sorry. We can't. But thanks for having me. You know, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some of the vision we have for the future of virtual reality. And although my background is as an engineer and a filmmaker, and we are a virtual reality technology company, I'm going to actually be talking less about technology and more about what I think needs to be some of the focus in VR for the future. And really, I titled my talk to Future Virtual Reality, and I realized I just added it needs to be more human. So I want to share a little bit about some of that vision with you and tell you a little bit about some of the things that we at Positron are doing to try to close that gap between what virtual reality could be a few years from now and what it is today. How many people have seen Ready Player One already? Oh, not too many. All right. So this is a poster screenshot from it, and if you've read the book or seen the movie, you know it's about a future. I think the year's like 2045, and basically the world's gone to crap. Everybody lives in these like crappy trailers stacked on top of each other and spends all their time escaping into VR into this world called the Oasis. And I love the book and enjoyed the movie a lot. You know, one of the things is like I don't want our future to look like this, where you know we're living in some kind of crappy real world and continually escaping into a VR world. So I think the movie tries to make a point of that at the end, but. The main point I want to make today, and I'll walk you through some of the ideas we have for that, and at the end we'll do a couple of demos with our virtual reality chair as an example of some of the ways we're trying to address it, is that some of the way we focus on VR today, by whether you're a storyteller, whether you're a technologist, an entrepreneur, or just a creative, is how much do we focus on making it more human? It's very easy to focus on the technology. When you look at the Oculus Rift and those first versions that came out, you know, I mean, it was very cool. The first time I put it on, that's when I saw, I want to be involved with this medium. This has got incredible potential, but it's a really ugly box that you're sticking on top of your face, and it's hard to imagine, you know, that couldn't have been designed a little better. When I think about some of the problems with VR, this is one of the images that comes to mind. This is a VR screening at Sundance Film Festival. I think it's 2 years old, but I love this image because it captures sort of that the problems with VR in terms of, you know, it's this bulky setup. It's got wires going around your face. Once you're inside, it's cool, but it's not something that feels comfortable yet. And so some of the current problems that we see with virtual reality is that the first thing we notice is people always tell us that the visual quality is a little underwhelming. You know, we're used to seeing 4K resolution, and the current state of the headsets, although that continues to improve, is such that you're bringing, even if you could have a 4K headset, these pixels aren't so close to your eye, you're seeing some of this screen door effect. That is a problem that will be solved, I believe, in the next 18 to 24 months. The headsets are getting better and better. The technology is developing. But that is something that we feel this gap between what we know it should look like visually and where it is now. It's complicated for consumer use. Just curious, raise a show of hands. How many people own a VR headset at home and use it? So a few of you, yeah, and that seems about right. You know, maybe 5% of the people here do. It hasn't gotten a huge mass adoption yet. Probably everybody has tried VR at some point and goes, yeah, that was cool. But it's at the point where, you know, a high-end VR headset, especially for the average person who's not techie, getting it set up on your computer, having it tethered, it's got some issues with widespread adoption. It's not the way television is, for example. Motion sickness is another issue. A lot of people, they've done some studies, maybe 20 to 25% of people on average will get motion sick in VR. And a lot of that has to do with the brain seeing these visual images that indicate that your body should be moving, but it's not. It's one of the things we set out to solve with this platform was by adding a little bit of motion, we've reduced that to 0.2% of people getting motion sick. And then ugly form factors. I don't know what it is, but I feel like there really is an opportunity, and I'll show you some images in a minute, to change VR to where it can be beautiful design. It can feel like a premium experience, you know, not just, in other words, we should be designing for people, not for the technology. And then content is another issue that we're seeing. My guess is if you've done VR, you've probably seen a demo, something that's a few minutes long, maybe you've played a game. But particularly when it comes to narrative VR, something you would pay to go see at the, let's imagine at the multiplex. There's just not a lot of content out there. A lot of it's been very short form, and there's reasons for that. But as we are looking at integrating these into cinemas and creating VR cinemas, one of the challenges is how do we get studios to create enough content to fill that pipeline? And then lastly, there's still challenges with the distribution system. So if you're a creative and you want to be, have a great idea for a VR game or a VR experience, it's very hard to make any money on that yet. You can put it on places like the Oculus Store or Steam, but one of the things we're trying to solve is have places in location-based entertainment where creators can monetize their content and create a distribution platform. So we started focusing on this by creating what we call a cinematic VR experience. I come from a background as a filmmaker, and so although we are supporting games and interactive experiences, we were very interested in storytelling and creating something akin to the same sensation you have when you watch a great movie, and looking at what does that take to succeed. So I want to show you just for a moment a case study. When we developed this prototype of the first Voyager, Universal Studios came to us and said, hey, we love this. We just created an experience with Tom Cruise for the Mummy movie. It's the Mummy VR experience, and we want to show this. So we ended up making 20 more of these and created the world's first motion VR cinema. And I'll show you a little video that tells you a little more about how that happened.
T-minus 1 minute and counting.
Part of the vision for this was how could we create a VR theater? How do you get people to come and watch VR in a similar fashion to the way we watch movies today? We built a chair with a small footprint that allowed motorized robotic rotation as well as leaning back and forth. There's something very powerful about the sense that you're able to have some motion through the space.
We've created the world's first cinematic VR theater using our software and hardware platform.
Voyager debuted at the Sundance Film Festival and showcased world premieres of Sundance VR films, setting a new standard for how VR content will be exhibited. Voyager represents, for us, the future of VR cinema, consisting of multiple Voyagers synchronized together that allows users to feel completely immersed in the narrative story.
What we want to do is be able to bring that where people are able to access virtual reality in a way that they cannot do in their homes.
Well, we're here at South by. First time ever that a theater has been put together for cinematic VR.
20 people will come in, sit on the chair, and then the whole experience will start together.
So it has been quite challenging from the manufacturing all the way through the software.
Universal Studios and IMAX were looking for a way to deliver the Mummy VR experience starring Tom Cruise, and they turned to Positron to deliver its Voyager VR theater system. Positron was involved in delivering, setting up, and programming the content on its Voyager VR platform.
I'd had this idea of creating a zero-G sequence for some time. How do we put them right on the edge of the seat? It's always my goal.
I'm excited about seeing this particular piece, the Mummy, in that it's got kind of the G-force weightlessness.
Now we're pulling up, now everything gets really heavy. So the blood starts draining down towards your feet, and now to lift your arms up is much heavier.
There is a moment when that chair slightly moves, you feel like you might actually be having blood rush from the head and feet. It really gets you into that.
Tom Cruise is right there. You can't not react to that.
I love kind of watching the sort of eye-opening joy that we bring to people.
Once it was on, I was just like, oh, whoa, I'm kind of like zoned out of the world.
Every Voyager also includes haptic feedback, physical audio embedded right into the fabric as part of the chair.
Like I could feel the bass coming through my back, basically. So I was like, oh, it's like there's a voice coming out of me.
That moment where you really go up with Tom Cruise is really amazing. This is completely immersive in the most joyful way.
We come from a film background as well as an engineering background. So part of what we're offering with Voyager is not just a chair that moves, but a whole set of tools for creators to start directing and and guiding the viewer through the story that they want to tell.
It's really about complementing the experience, and through that process, we've greatly reduced motion sickness.
So we're looking forward to collaborating not just with Universal Studios and IMAX that we have, but with all kinds of content creators that are looking for ways to tell really visionary stories in this new medium. All right, thanks for watching the little promo. That was a lot of fun. We literally got it done the day before that was to go live, and didn't know if it was going to work. I mean, it was a talk about a close call. That could have gone another way. But one of the things that we're excited about is just seeing the reactions of people to taking VR, and we don't do anything with the headsets. We use the same headsets, whether it's the Rift. In this case, we now use the Samsung Odyssey. But it's about complementing the experience and thinking about the entire experience from the comfort, the feel of the fabric, the haptic feedback. We now have added scent, and creating that sense of immersion so that you really are able to lose yourself in the story and let a creator guide you through that. One of the things that we learned too is that for I think VR to be adopted and embraced in a wide way, and where people are able to love it, as well as create a business model where people are willing to pay to go see this, is you really have to think about, again, just the entire environment, something that's familiar. So this is why the chair sort of evokes a little bit of that, red velvet cinema. It feels, we even use the word theater. What do we really call a VR cinema? It's funny that we're using the word cinema, because that is not what VR is. But that's been the case, I think, with every new medium. When we talk about even the term movie theater refers to live theater, right, before cinema existed. So we're always struggling for the vocabulary of how to describe the ways this new medium will be exhibited. One of the things, too, we found is that by having a synchronized start to having a communal feel of everybody getting into chairs at the same time, starting at the same time, ending at the same time, it really creates that social experience of sharing the story together. People taking their headsets off, looking at each other and going, wow, that was really cool, versus becoming isolated. What I see as some of the future perils of VR is I think about addiction. We already are addicted to our screens, right? Like, do I need now one more thing? I'm just never going to take off. So I do think about that. And how do we create VR in a way that is humanizing us and not getting us to become addicted to another medium device? Isolation is something that comes up. It's in the movies like Ready Player One and other places. There's this idea of what is it just an escape? And once, we joke about, I really do think about this, like, if this is so great, are people just going to sit in it and never come out, never leave their house? I don't want to be afraid to put my kids into VR, and I think about that, and my daughters, And then security is interesting. I read this article just the other day that talked about how someone had hacked the VR headsets, and if you've ever done a standing room VR experience, you know that there's a certain defined physical space that you can walk in, and then these grids come up to warn you, you're about to go off the stage, don't walk anymore. Well, that was hacked so that could be moved very, very slowly over time. So people were actually moving, not realizing where they were, and like running into walls. Theoretically, it could be used to harm you or do other kinds of things. So these are some of the things I think that will have to be addressed in the future. So I want to offer 3 ways I think that we can help think about humanizing VR. Again, whether you're an artist, a storyteller, an entrepreneur, a software developer, I think about storytelling, design, and community. And these are the things that I think are inherently relate to our humanity and our sense of connection. So storytelling is important because we've told stories since the beginning, since we've gathered around campfires, and that evolved eventually into live theater and then other kinds of medium, radio, then cinema, television, and now VR. This is a screenshot from a film that we showed at Sundance this year in Voyager from a wonderful studio and 2 directors named Felix and Paul. It's called Space Explorers. It's a documentary about what it's like to be a NASA astronaut. And it was the closest I've ever felt to fulfilling my childhood dream of actually being an astronaut. So we also experimented with storytelling, and we opened a VR theater for just 1 week at the Ace Hotel here in downtown LA. And we showcased, we realized that a lot of a lot of filmmakers and a lot of storytellers are making some really fantastic VR content, but nobody knows about it. It's not getting exposed unless you're going to these film festivals. So we took 3 of the best VR experiences that we'd seen that were playing at festivals like Sundance and Tribeca, and we played a whole hour of content. We also wanted to find out, can people sit for a whole hour, which is a long time in VR. And we sold tickets to that. This is a photo of the VR theater at Ace Hotel. And it was a really good experience. We sold out every show, got a lot of great feedback. We found out that people can watch VR for an hour if the storytelling is good and the delivery mechanism works. I want to comment on design for a moment. And this is a couple screenshots from a company called No Object up in, I think they're in Palo Alto. But let me see if this works, this little video. All right, that may not work. But the idea is like, what if we started creating headsets that are more like stylish fashion accessories versus simply an ugly box that you put on your head. And I love some of these concepts because I think when we see things like this is starting to think more about what connects with us as people, color and style and texture and something we care about. Another example of good design that I like, this is a photo from a VR experience center in Paris. We actually have a chair of ours there as well, but it's a company called MK2 VR. They're really, in my mind, leading the way for how VR should be experienced. They built this next to a cinema, and again, I look at this as this is less about kind of this cave full of wires and only oriented at gamers and something that has a beautiful design aesthetic to it. And thirdly, I was mentioning community. I think that while VR will certainly be an individualized medium that people will use at home or on their own, to the degree in which we emphasize a communal experience, I think it helps humanize the technology. We go to the movies still, or we watch Netflix at home with friends or our spouse. And even though you may not be talking during the movie to each other, and hopefully you're not texting, you can still, there's still something really special about, communally sharing that story and that emotional journey at the same time. And so that's why we're really focused on trying to build these ideas of VR theaters and VR cinemas. And again, when we say cinema, it doesn't mean like it's only going to be a passive, necessarily VR experience. It could be some kind of interactive experience or a journey or a game even. But the idea is of being able to do it together. This is something we certainly found when we did the first VR theater last year with the Mummy experience, and since then we've taken these chairs around the world and set them up in places, whether it's film festivals or trade shows or events, and found that oddly it's actually more communal than simply watching a movie because people tend to linger, tend to talk about it, tend to hang out more before and after. And when we were setting up our VR theater at the Ace Hotel, having a bar next to it definitely helps, So just to wrap some of this up, and then I want to invite somebody to come try this experience, and we'll open up for a Q&A. Again, storytelling is a big part of this. Stories that can inspire us. I would love, we especially as a technology platform want to see more creators get involved with VR. If you are a writer or a filmmaker, or someone who is interested in storytelling, I'd really urge you to consider taking a hard look at VR because right now it's still the dawn. In 4 or 5 years, this is going to be a huge, huge industry. But this is really an opportunity, I think, now to get into the ground in terms of creating VR stories that matter. The technology, again, I think if you're a designer, especially a product designer, please help design better headsets. That's our number one gripe is just the headsets are still continuing to be it's not just the technology in them, but even the ergonomic design is what we're finding that is shockingly bad. And I think it's going to be getting better. And then thinking about community too. How do you bring people together through VR? Not just in the real world like we were showing in the VR theater, but also in the virtual world. I know Facebook is developing some of these social VR experiences. We're adding a feature now to our chairs where when you sit down in yours and your friend is in the other, you can actually see each other in VR as avatars and talk to each other and sort of have that experience together, whether you're physically next to each other or in different cities across the world. So I think what I want to do next is ask someone who would like to volunteer to try this. So All right, Mustafa, come on up. I saw that hand go up fast. And should we open up for Q&A, Mike? Or okay. So he's gonna get situated. He's gonna watch a 3-minute experience. We're gonna open up for questions, but I want to let.
So right now we're going to do the Q&A while he's actually also experiencing. Okay, so he's going to be doing his thing. But I just want to do a quick recap. I think it's really amazing. I wasn't here, unfortunately, with Friday Coffee Meetup as a co-organizer, so I missed your talk. But I think it's really interesting to see him, Jeffrey, that is, evolve over the years, start scrappy, bootstrapping. He told me earlier offline that it was him and one other person. And they innovated a really cool solution to, the technological question of like, where is virtual reality going to be taking us in the future, and what sort of innovations we can look forward to. But I really like the holistic perspective of like, yes, there's solutions, but there are also problems built in with that solution, which is isolationism and addiction and all that stuff. So it'd be really cool to see how your company moves forward in the future while tantalizing the senses with this really cool technology, but also having a sense of responsibility at the same time. So I think you have a really good head on your shoulders, and I really respect that. And I think it's really awesome to see this guy on our platform 3 years later with this. That's amazing. Anyway, Q&A now. So if you have a question, raise your hand. John will walk around with the. Is John here? There he is. John will walk around with the mic. Please save storytelling and comments for offline. Jeffrey will be hanging out with us for a little bit, so you can do that later. But questions now. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for a great presentation, sure. Jeffrey. You mentioned very casually you're adding scent. Mm-hmm. Elaborate, please.
Sure. Does this one have a scent module? No, it doesn't. This one. So yeah, we have integrated scent into some of our chairs, and there's several companies that actually are making these scent dispensers. For me, and our philosophy is always this needs to be about the storytelling, not just sort of a gimmick. And so scent is one of these things that can be very powerful emotionally if used right. We are integrating some technology that can dispense up to 6 different scents that can be customized at different points. The intensity of the scent can be customized. So we're working with a filmmaker who has scent in his VR story. It's a 45-minute VR musical, and it's an Indian filmmaker named A.R. Rahman, who's a very talented musician, and it really enhances the experience. The smell of like freshly laundered clothes, or the scent of like that musty forest when you walk out. So we're excited about adding that.
As a woman, every time I get in the car and there's no place for me to put my purse, and I do a slight stop and it falls and that sort of thing. So I curse the designers for not thinking about purses. And I'll just say that when I've had my VR experiences, one was public, and the whole time, as much as I was totally amazed, I was worried to the point of anxiety about where my purse was someone stealing it, that sort of thing. So I would just encourage you as a man to think about where a purse would go.
Great point. Thank you. No, thank you for that.
I think it's amazing. I love
awesome.
the design. Yeah. I just don't know where my purse goes.
No, that's that. My co-founder is a woman, Jennifer Endell. She's not here today, but like. This is having that sort of perspective is really helpful because we'll need to add a purse compartment.
Hi there, Martin. Fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about VR and AR future? Are they going to diverge, become one and the same?
Yeah, my sense, and it's I didn't even mention AR, and it's funny because like VR's had all this hype and it's a little bit like this, and now AR is all the rage. I love that reaction there. My personal feeling on it is they're going to merge. Like we're not really going to distinguish. I think that eventually we'll have some kind of glasses that will allow AR, but when you want to completely immerse yourself and shut off the real world, you'll be able to do that. So obviously the technologies at this point serve mostly different purposes, but I don't see any reason. Even Vive recently announced an AR feature to their VR headset where you can use the cameras to see through it and add an AR system. So how was that, Mustafa? Here, tell us.
You look at my face, but
you've never done this.
I've never done this. I've done like the regular VR where you're walking around. I actually did it at the office, and in here I was waiting for it to just like drop and be like but it was actually pretty cool. It did feel like I was floating. Just being able to look around is actually pretty cool. Being able to like look fully backwards and there's something there, And I think this quality is way better than whatever I did before in regards, you're talking about like the resolution and just the like the real look of it. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for trying it. Yeah. And we'll have a sign-up sheet, I think, for a few people if you want to try this afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
Kind of jerry-rigged it a little bit. It's just a little piece of paper with a pen. If you guys are interested in signing up and forming a queue, please do that after the Q&A so that we don't disrupt the process. But it's right here.
Yeah, I think.
What kind of things are you doing for outside of the experience? Like, do you have? Are you all developing any app components or sort of comic books to lead up to the story that's going to be taking place inside of the mask?
Are you talking about on the content side?
Yeah, on the content side, I
Yeah.
feel like virtual reality is something that can take place outside of the mask as much as it takes place inside.
Right,
So
right.
I'm interested in how these stories are being built to go beyond what people are seeing for that brief moment.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think that's the right way to think about it. We are not yet involved with, we're going to start actually making our own content. Like right now, we've been taking other creators' content and integrating it into this exhibition platform, but that's how I think it should be thought about. It shouldn't be just purely a experience inside the headset, but something that, one of the ways we have seen storytellers integrate this is they'll have the entire environment will be themed out, so right now we have a few chairs at Tribeca Film Festival, and it's doing the world premiere of a shark documentary called Into the Now, and Robert De Niro was just in the chair yesterday watching it, but the whole space with the chairs has these neon sharks as you walk in, and so there's this sense of anticipation I think that is important to build up and think about the whole experience. I like the comic books. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, sure. Here, I'll put it up on the screen.
It was on the screen earlier, so
Yeah,
I know there's a
just
screen
go
that
back
has that
to the-
information. Here we go.
Right there. Uh-huh.
This would be a perfect delivery device for my client's training.
There you are. I hear the voice.
No, my client trains in different ways, and this would be a perfect delivery method. How do I find a development company to hook up with my client?
Anybody here develop VR? All right, so see these raised hands, yeah, and then let's come all talk.
I have a question about interactivity.
There.
I saw the guy who found the Titanic talk about being on the East Coast and using a robot on the West Coast, and I always wanted to travel using virtual reality. How about a robot somewhere, and I can not travel to that destination, just use that robot? Can you do that too?
For sure. Yeah, no, that's there is a lot of interest in the travel industry, and I think that this is particularly, we've been actually approached by companies that are looking to do travel experiences. There's even a company in Japan that has this experience where you put on the headset and you're inside a first class 777, and you even get served meals by flight attendants where even though the flight is, it's not a real airplane taking off, and then when you land, you get to see some of the travel experience. So I think that's going to be one of the ways that VR is going to allow us to take some of these, virtual trips around the world or outer space or places that don't even exist. Okay.
I'm John. I'm a big fan of the platform, huge VR fan. I share in what you were saying in the beginning of the presentation where the content is so segmented. You go onto the PlayStation VR network or Oculus, the store, and you have different chunks of content at different various levels of quality and experience, and that's one of the biggest frustrations I feel as a consumer of VR right now. Do you have any suggestions, or do you know of any place on the web, maybe forums or a platform, or maybe a community that's being developed that shares a listing of content and where to get it?
Right. I don't, and that would be a great idea for somebody to do. I know there's somebody that's trying to create a VR version of IMDb, kind of like list all what's out there, but I haven't seen that yet. I think that's something we need, almost like across all the different platforms. not just the Oculus Store or the PlayStation Network, but where's this VR content? What are the ratings, and even see user reviews on it. I think that's a huge opportunity. So if anyone here wants to start a business, there you go.
You want to check with Jeffrey?
Oh yeah, right here. You had a question.
Question right here.
Okay, he's been raising his hand. But
Okay.
yeah, that's enough.
What are the alternatives to a headset? For example, a private screen in front of you that somehow is moving but is not attached to your head, instead it's attached to your chair.
Yeah, so some people have experimented with 360 domes where you can be inside and still have this sense of immersion by filling your field of view entirely with the imagery. We actually had at one point talked to somebody about like putting on a big curved screen around this. I think that's possible. I think there's definitely some challenges with just the sheer size and form factor of that, and then how do you let multiple people do that at the same time? So if you need this fairly large dome per person, that's a big footprint. That's not to say it couldn't be done, and I think it could be chair size. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, there's definitely lots of room for innovation there, and I think if you can make VR work without having to necessarily put something uncomfortable on your face, that'd be good. I mean, having said that, a lot of us here wear glasses. I do. We don't think that's particularly uncomfortable. So in my opinion, it's a matter of time till we get to the point where we can have comfortable headsets. They're still bulky.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Want to get in? Okay. Yeah, who's next on the list to demo? Great. Yeah. Okay.
Jason Rocks from Liquid Cinema, and are you concerned about fragmentation of playback on devices? And if that's a concern, and I'm guessing it's going to be, will metadata standardization solve that? And what is the route to metadata standardization at this point?
Yeah. So are you referring to like licensing on different devices, or just the fact that it's
interactive
like
layers?
A build is only made for one device and not another?
Yeah, that it only plays on this device, or it only plays on that device. So as a producer, if you go back to like the 90s, they had set-top boxes and content producers were making interactive TV, but if you made something, it'd only run on Comcast's box, or it'd only run on AT&T's box. So everybody said, forget that. I don't want to have to redo my work all over again for every single platform.
Yeah.
So then there was massive fragmentation, and we don't have interactivity today other than play, pause, and start.
Right.
Which is really what everybody only wanted anyways, in my opinion.
Right, exactly, yeah.
But in terms of metadata, I'd like to hear your thoughts on metadata from interactivity layers to how it sidecars with the MPEG files themselves, and how that all structures work, and that it works on every device.
Yeah, I think that's a huge need. We run into that all the time with different creators that have targeted different devices, and we try to not, although we're headset agnostic, we try to for the most part, standardize on one headset at a time as rolling out. So often we're asking them to convert or, coming up with some of our own schema for metadata. Part of what we'd love to do is just, at some point propose a metadata system that you just have, it's about getting enough adoption, and enough people sort of agree. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, let me know. And we want to add our motion, a motion system as part of that metadata too. So whether you're playing it on this motion chair or not, that can be encoded as well, because part of it is, yeah, it's at TEC. Yep. Yeah, we have a couple there. So, yep. Yeah.
With your background as a filmmaker, what are some of the unique, layers of consideration when it comes to actually creating content? I just think of the differences between, shooting on a studio versus on location, and lighting considerations and whatnot.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, storytelling in VR. Some of the considerations are really that. I think a lot of the same storytelling things apply. There's still good writing, there's still good acting. It's more about the cinematic technique. You don't really have a rectangular frame that you're dealing with. You're working with a 360 canvas. And part of what I wanted to address with this chair is the ability to guide the viewer and almost let the chair act as a camera framing device, because you obviously aren't seeing the entire 360 sphere at once. You're seeing maybe 120 degrees of it, within a section. But I think part of it is some of the considerations are just how do you tell a story in that medium. I've seen filmmakers experiment with, I think earlier on people felt like the stories had to be always first-person point of view. Like you're a character, and so you'd see stories where you're in a wheelchair in a insane asylum, or you're a medical patient, and everybody's looking at you. And now what we're seeing is those rules are being broken. You can just be a passive observer like in a normal film, and not. It's almost akin to live theater, where except you're put up on the stage next to the characters. That's some of what we're seeing. The other thing I've seen that's I'd say somewhat unique to VR, is when you're creating narrative stories that are not just film but use a game engine like Unity or Unreal. You can really play with a sense of scale. One of the things we saw at Sundance was a film where things would suddenly get dollhouse size or get giant, and that's very easy to do when you have everything in a game engine, and it feels completely different than if you've just been watching that on a regular film.
I want to get some feedback from Andrew, because he's also an organizer for a meetup group that focuses on neurotech. And so these are EEG devices, and we were talking about VR and EEG, and now that he's had a chance to try it out, I thought you might want to ask him some questions.
Yeah, it was very trippy. The free fall thing was, I actually felt like that.
Cool.
And now I'm taking a second to like
ground yourself.
Yeah, I mean like
chamomile tea over here.
yeah. My equilibrium is definitely thrown off with that. But I was going to talk to you afterwards but I guess my question would be, where would biometrics maybe play with this? I know a lot of companies are doing like real simulation, like they control the content changes with your heartbeat,
right,
and stuff like that. And especially with people with anxiety, depression. There's a lot of therapeutic benefits to that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's something we're actually looking at. Ricardo actually has a PhD in neuroscience as well as part of the Positron team here. And so part of roadmap is to look at integrating biometrics and getting some of that neural feedback almost into the content. One of the anticipated uses for this too is for mental health and treating PTSD, anxiety disorders, and those sorts of things. And I think having those biometrics will be a big part of it. That's a really exciting part for me, is to kind of have that real-time feedback on, and not necessarily always just for feedback, but also just to gauge emotional responses. We can do things like what parts of the experience were exciting, what heat maps, where was somebody looking at during the experience, and use that to understand what's working, what's not working in terms of human behavior.
Cool. Over here, this side.
Hey, actually, what you just stated kind of leads into my question. As far as traditional movies and storytelling, have you seen any feedback from the people watching the movies and from the directors, sense of frustration that there's no direction because you have the capacity to see, as he had mentioned, behind yourself, whereas you're watching it in one direction, you see something active, I look behind myself, I see something completely different. Is there any frustration in that in the movie-going experience? Like, for example, The Mummy, I'm wondering how people saw the movie, if you have different angles.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think that as one of my frustrations with VR too, as filmmakers, like I might spend all this time and want you to really focus here for a moment, but if I happen to be looking over here, I've missed that moment. And traditionally, storytellers have tried different techniques. They'll sometimes black out, just create a 180 scene and it goes dark, so you look, oh, there's nothing there, let me look back here. Other times they'll use sound cues to try to alert your attention. It's one of the reasons filmmakers, and one of the reasons we created this, was to really almost force the main field of view. You're still free to look anywhere you want, but we like to say the motion, having this rotational yaw motion takes the FOMO out of VR, is what we're saying. So that's right. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
We can get the next person in the hot seat here. Jack Moore. Jack Moore, come on down. All right, here we go.
And a question in front.
Hi. So I saw an interview with Francis Ford Coppola recently, and he said something like, about 3D film, in that 3D film was around in the 50s and 60s, and then it kind of came back. And everything I've seen about 3D film lately has been that sales are kind of down across the board. So to that effect, like Jaron Lanier was working on VR headsets like this in the 80s and 90s. And in the 90s, you could even get a VR headset that did, head tracking and stuff like that for the Sega Genesis, and there's ones that allowed you to play Doom. So curious, as to like what's different now, what's more compelling about it now the second time around?
Right. Yeah. No. Good question. And sometimes the comparison to 3D comes up too, because I think 3D was a big and always has been a big bust financially for companies that thought, oh, now people are going to pay more to see 3D. I actually don't usually see the 3D version of the film. Yeah. I think it's just really doesn't add that much. To me, the fundamental difference is, VR is not just adding another dimension or an enhancement to something I've already seen. It's a completely new medium. What's different from the headsets of the 90s, I remember in the 90s trying one of those, and obviously the graphics were barely some kind of very low polygon count of what you could see. It's just that we're getting pretty close to complete fidelity. I think in another 2 years, and so there's sort of this vision of once you put this on, you may not be able to distinguish, say, even 5 years from now with Moore's law, whether you're in actual reality or virtual reality visually. I didn't mention this in the talk earlier, but in security, one of the things that we've talked to some people about and thinking about is, this is like a Black Mirror episode, right? What happens when VR becomes so realistic and every sense input is triggered to you might forget that you're in VR? Do we need some kind of like, little red dot or something to remind you that you're not actually in VR? So to me, that's the difference. I think it's also the way audiences respond. 3D felt like, it's going to be this cool. I feel like it's more spectacle than really enhancing the story. For the most part, very few movies need to be 3D. Avatar was one that sort of created a different visual style, that added to it. But
so my understanding of the history of film is limited, and is this better? Yeah. So my understanding of the history of film is limited, but from what I know, Citizen Kane was a groundbreaking film in that it changed the way in which films were shot because it kind of approached it from a different angle, right? So it kind of broke the mold. Instead of being kind of a play that was filmed, it had film become its own medium. Has there yet been a Citizen Kane of VR that you have seen?
No, not yet. I think that we're getting close, and when I've been to I was at Sundance Film Festival and South by Southwest. Some of the innovations we're seeing are really, really amazing. Seeing what people are doing with VR, I feel like we're in this transition period, to use your film analogy, where it's right before Citizen Kane, but it was after. Just like cinema started mainly with spectacle, right? It was like the train coming at the camera and people freaking out, or not really fully developed stories, and then editing techniques develop, and then Citizen Kane, of course, just because of the ways they use camera movement. I think we're getting pretty close to that, but we have yet to see this one VR piece that's sort of the game changer. But I'm optimistic that as creators focus on this, that's going to happen.
You have time for one more.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, so mine's just a quick question. I grew up in the 3D glass era in Boston, which they handed out the 3D glasses when you walked into the theater. Right. But my question is, what's going to be the cost factor impact to the consumer using this device as opposed to just going to the theater and seeing the movie with the advancement of 3D? Hold on to.
Yeah, what's the cost impact? I think it's it's probably going to be it's definitely going to be, at least in the foreseeable near future, a higher cost than going to see a movie. I mean, just because the technology is early, the financial models for this to work. But when you think, it's interesting because when we think about what consumers pay for entertainment, movies are extremely, extremely cheap. You might pay, here in LA, $12, $15, maybe $18 to see a movie. But you'll pay $50, $70 to go see a live theater, at least that much for a sports game. So we're kind of looking to, where does VR fit in this? If people start thinking of it like this should be an $8 experience, the business models won't sustain that right now. But if this is set up as something to be a curated, more like a theatrical experience, it's very unique that you're going to get something. When we did our experiments, the tickets for the hour-long VR experience were $35, and we found that those all sold out immediately, and when we added more shows, they would sell out. So my guess is that those ticket prices will end up somewhere between $20 and $35.